Okay, so I'm going to do a quick review, and we can have a quick discussion as if people are interested about arm's length review. So really what I plan on just covering is some of the basics. When is it required? What are the definitions of arm's length? So there's definitions that have been written by MOE and by CSAP and are in the indemnity. So I'll just review those for, so the first 2 points really are review purposes. It should be nothing new, but it's a pretty important part of our role, so I figured it would be worth reiterating. And then the third section is to discuss a little bit about the interpretation and the application of it. And I can't really provide any firm guidance on that one way or another. It's really, it's really an interpretation of what's written. But we can go through a couple of examples and see if people want to discuss that. So, when is an arm's length review required? So, if you're making a submission for a numerical, an AIP or a CFC based on a numerical standards, you have to have an arm's length review if there's off-site contamination. If it's a risk-based submission, then it also requires arm's length review for both the numerical standards AP and the risk-based AP. And so that was a clarification that came out from the ministry and was provided in CSAP's summer update last year. And so there's, that's worth keeping in mind for sure, because I think there were some varying interpretations prior to that, but I think it's crystal clear now. And then for contaminated sites or contaminated soil relocation agreements, if it's based on a risk assessment for the receiving site, then it requires an arm's length review as well. And then so I asked myself, what is the documentation that needs to be provided to confirm that an arm's length review was provided? And this comes in the summary of site condition, where the APs have to sign off on the types of arm's length reviews that they've performed. That's really the place where that documentation occurs, and then also in your cover letter to CSAP that basically says here's the submission. And then what's important to keep in mind is so this is from BCMOE's Procedure 12. That's where this writing comes from. But essentially the confirmation that if there's insufficient evidence that an arm's length review has been carried out, then the application and the recommendation from the AP gets returned to CSAP. And as far as I'm aware, this hasn't been an issue to date. But that's basically what's in writing from the ministry. So the other part that the other document that this affects is the indemnity, which most APs have signed, and this is an agreement between the Ministry of Environment and the APs that have signed it, and the indemnity does not apply if an arm's length review was required and did not take place. And so with respect to the indemnity, so as I got into this topic, my initial goal was, or some of my initial thinking was, there's some wording that's there in the definitions between CSAP documents, and there's some definitions that the ministry have provided, but there's really not been a whole lot more that's been said about it. And I know that from my own practice, and then from discussing arm's length issues with other APs, there's sometimes some gray areas or some discussion points. And so my initial intent of this presentation was to try and provide some clarity on those gray areas. But as I learned more about it and talked to the ministry to try and get more guidance, and talked to some CSAP members to try and get some more guidance to provide some real firm conclusions in my presentation today, it was made clear to me that this is a contract, essentially, between the APs and the ministry, and there's the wording that's in the contract, and if you want more clarity or some more interpretation about that, then you should consult a lawyer. And so I'm going to review what's in writing, just for the purposes of reviewing, and then I'm going to bring up some topics for discussion, but I guess I'm going to put a cover your behind statement out there that really this is the interpretation of it is up to lawyers. So take it for what it's worth. So the formal definition. This is in the BCMOE Procedure 8. And so this is a lot of text, and really I'm breaking my own cardinal rules of never having too much text on a slide, but again, because it's legalese, I didn't want to start paraphrasing things and getting it wrong and having someone get mad at me later. So anyways, I highlighted what's important. So really there's 2 points, in my opinion, that are important. The first blurb there is that during the AP review, the author of the report, or the project manager, if you will, and the AP who's doing the arm's length review can't have a supervisory relationship during the work or during the review. That's the first item. And then the second item is the wording that says basically the arm's length AP can't participate in the preparation of the reviewable document, and that their guidance needs to be limited to general guidance. And so, those overarching high-level words. It just says general guidance that's up to interpretation. But that's the ministry's document. CSAP has reference to this as well in their practice guidelines, and again, a whole bunch of text, but again, you'll see similar wording for good reason. Do not participate in the preparation of the document or the work, and that any direction should be limited to general guidance, i.e. non-directed guidance regarding the approach and the methodology. And then further in CSAP's practice guidelines, there's recognition that there's benefits to early involvement, getting the AP involved early. But then again, you want that the involvement needs to be limited, should in no way obstruct the AP's objectivity. The arm's length AP should have no role in project management. And again, their guidance should be limited to general advice. So there's some additional wording here that's provided where the AP should not outline or assign work or specific methods and procedures to be followed. So there's some additional information to help you interpret what is meant by general advice. So not directed, don't outline or assign work. And so really the overall objective here is to not obstruct the arm's length AP's objectivity. And that's really what you need to keep in mind. And whenever you're considering your extent of involvement, the underlying guidance there is to not let your involvement obstruct your objectivity. Okay, so let's talk about this a little bit, and by all means, I tried to get some input from some other APs and to see what types of issues they've struggled with or considered when they've dealt with being an arm's length AP, and so the early involvement, I think it's well recognized that there are benefits to getting an AP involved early. They just have to make sure that they're providing general guidance and not really detailed directed guidance. And so one item that came up during my discussions with other APs is just to make sure you're very careful when you're communicating with the client. So you're doing an arm's length review of practitioners' work, and they have a client, and you may be in a meeting with the client and the practitioner, and you just need to be careful that whatever guidance you're providing, it isn't obstructing your objectivity. And so be careful about the extent of communication and the extent of any commitments that you're making, and make sure you're not getting involved in any type of project management. So let's talk a little bit about general advice and guidance, and so this isn't going to be rocket science, but it's made to just, the intent here is to get you just thinking about it a little bit. So if you're reviewing a report, if you're reviewing data, is it appropriate to review the data and say, I think you need more data to support this particular conclusion? In my opinion, I think that falls in the category of general guidance. You need more data to support your conclusion. Would it be okay to say you need a borehole in this exact location and you need to drill it with this type of drill rig and you need to analyze it for these 4 parameters? Probably not. Well, definitely not. So those are two extremes. These are easy examples. The gray area gets when you're in between, but again, the underlying goal is don't obstruct your objectivity through the process. If you're reviewing a report, in my opinion, it's appropriate to say, I think you need more rationale to support this particular conclusion. I think that would fall in the realm of general guidance. Would it be appropriate to say, to support that rationale, you need to state the following 4 things. I don't think so. That's probably getting too directed. So that one, in my opinion, is not in the realm of arm's length. So any comments or questions on that particular issue? General guidance? Okay.
Maybe this is going to come up. Going back to Cindy's point about a balancing act, when you're working with the same firm and the same client paying for the arm's length review as well as the other project manager, whether you want to or not, there's a subconscious activity at work in your decision making. And it's something I think we struggled with when we first set up the roster steering committee. Should we have arm's length be with a different consulting firm to get rid of that bias? We chose not to go that way, but you'll never eliminate it. I don't think you can eliminate it. I mean, these are extreme examples, but just the fact that need more data to support the conclusion when you already know the budget's toast, the client's antsy, and it's going to be harsh on your firm for you to say this, that puts a lot of pressure. You want to comment on that?
Sure. I think the only thing that comes to mind when I think about that concern is, I think in all the work we do, whether it's as an arm's length AP reviewer or when you're trying to provide the best value for your client, whenever you're signing and stamping a report, you're putting your name on the line and you're signing it and you're representative of your association and you've got to uphold certain standards regardless of the pressures from your client. So I think we always deal with those issues, whether we're acting as a project manager or an arm's length reviewer, and so maybe it's just I think we always have to wrestle with that. And I think when you're an arm's length reviewer, you got to know your role. Just as Cindy walked through all the roles, you got to know your roles and responsibilities, and before you're willing to, you have to make sure you're good with making the submission. So that's my thoughts on it.
Great, Trish here. The need to state the following being something that's got an X mark behind it. Just wondering where in the process this occurs, because once you are submitting you're making a submission, and if it does get pulled for an audit, it's like the submission was your own. And during an audit, you need to be able to justify every little thing that is said or done. Where do you draw the line in being able to have control over what's being submitted such that you can speak to every little thing that is said when something is pulled for an audit versus allowing the senior review to have their own wording for various things? When it becomes your own when it gets submitted. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do know what you're saying, and I think the way I think about it is just the process. So, the easiest way to get to the end goal is to, if you were to stick to general guidance and not directing it, would be, okay, I think you need more rationale to support this conclusion. It's up to it's up to the authors to produce the product. You're providing the review, so I think it's perfectly fine for the authors to say, okay, well, I think this is how I think I can support it more by making these 3 points, and then run that by you. And then you're in a review function. Yeah, okay, I think that's good, or I think it's still
not quite what I meant, and then it goes back again, and
so good discussion, right? I mean, I appreciate. I've gone through it too.
Okay.
And so but I think the intent here is just to remind us of what is in writing, and make sure you're in line with what's in writing and what we are committing to when we say we're doing an arm's length review. And if you feel yourself getting drawn in a little bit too much, then you better back out and push it more on the authors.
Thanks, Greg.
Yeah.
Thank you. With respect to review of reports, does that apply to draft reports or final reports? Or do you make a distinction?
I personally don't make a distinction. So in
your opinion, is it okay for an AP to comment on a draft report?
In my opinion, it is. So I think that, yeah. So in my opinion, it is. I think if it's assumed and expected that the AP is going to have some comments and some things that might need changing, polishing, whatever, then I think it makes perfect sense for that to be reviewed in a draft form rather than going through the process of filing a report and then changing it again. So that's my opinion. Am I off base on that? VJ?
I think these are excellent examples, and I agree with you on at the end of the day, the key word is review, and that takes that person out of the process. And in terms of addressing any comments during the project, basically the arm's length reviewer has to make that submission. So the less deficiencies there are, the better off everybody is. So it doesn't hurt to be involved as long as the arm's length reviewer retains that review role.
Yep. Yeah. Agreed. Okay. No.
So in terms of the review and needing the report to support conclusions, at what point does the AP provide their professional judgment and draw their own conclusions from the data to say they support it? Is it meant to, like if you're acting in the review capacity versus you're putting yourselves, I guess was what Trish was saying, you are now supporting the conclusion yourself as the AP who's signing off on it. You know, is that written in the summary site conditions or maybe in that cover letter that might go with it? Instead of the report standing it and you just say yes, yes, yes. Is the professional judgment part of the AP role or is it just the report writers and the project management role?
Yeah, so I'm going to apologize a little bit because there was a bunch of honking right in the middle of what you're saying, but I think I got the gist of it, so I'm going to try and address it, but if I missed something, please let me know. So so the professional judgment, so it's the arm's length AP's job to make sure that they are satisfied with what's being submitted. And the professional judgment is going to be both the professional judgment of the author, who's going to write it and explain their professional judgment, and then there's the professional judgment of the arm's length AP to say, do I agree or not with that report and those conclusions and that rationale. In my opinion, it's not up to the arm's length AP to say, well, maybe I should back up a little bit. I guess an arm's length AP could, if they wanted to, say, yeah, the report doesn't really provide enough justification, but I'm going to write my own letter that explains why I think it's okay and submit that, and hopefully between the two it'll be okay. That might be okay, and maybe someone from the Performance Assessment Committee could comment on that, but I think in my opinion as an arm's length AP, I'd rather have it justified in the report by the authors without me having to provide additional support that is needed to support the report.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you there. I think it's better off in the report than the AP having to defend it in a performance assessment or something. It's like, well, we interpret it this way. I know when I do the reviews, it's always. I know when I do a review, it's when I look at the report, it's if something's not clarified right, I say, you guys fix this before I sign off on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Did I address your question?
I think some of those gray areas.
Okay. All right. Good enough. Bob.
I've done a lot of reviews. I've been on the performance assessment panel for a long time. And I think professional judgment is something we've talked about a lot. And basically there's, the regulation. There are protocols that must be enforced. You can't really vary from those. And then there's guidance. So guidance, I think, is where that professional judgment is allowed. So, guidance says you're supposed to use 10-foot well screens, or 5-foot well screens, excuse me. You only, you use 10 feet. why does that still support the data that you present to show the site's been remediated? So I think that's where professional judgment can come into this, is really looking at the guidance documents. And was there another way that they resolved the issue without exactly following the guidance?
And so do you think that professional judgment should be supported in the report by the author, or do you think that the AP reviewer just takes that upon themselves?
It has to actually come from the consultant, I think, who's preparing the report.
Yeah, okay.
So they have to have that rationale. And you have to, as the AP, decide whether or not the rationale they used was supportable.
Yep. Okay. That makes good sense, Bob. Yeah. Okay. Oh.
This gets complicated in an actual performance assessment, where the panel members tell the person who's having the assessment, I think my voice is loud enough.
Oh, okay.
That we need further clarification on this item, and they're asking actually the panel, the AP. The AP truly wants to stay arm's length, goes to the document writers and says, this is what they're asking for. Can you address this? Here's some general guidance. Rewrite an addendum report. I have to review it. Gets back. It's not clear in the when you're in that performance assessment process how that arm's length stays and how you get to the final product.
That is a good point. Yeah, I think if we go back to, I don't want to complicate things here, but if we go back to the definitions, did not participate in preparation of the supporting documents. So I guess, when you're in a performance assessment and you're writing a supplemental document to address the stage 1 comments of the PA, then that does end up forming part of the submission documents. So I agree with you, it gets complicated, but if I go back to this, if that response ends up being part of the formal submission document, there's a response, the definition is you got to stay arm's length. Yeah. When you say the project team, you mean including the arm's length reviewer?
The PA panel gives it to me, the AP. I go back to the project team. They write a draft addendum. I refine, review, and sign it. That's how the system is now. It should be if it's a supporting document and you read that, it should be actually just signed by that project team.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's not how it is now.
Oh, no?
No.
Huh? Okay. Well, maybe that's something for this. Why don't we pass that on to the performance assessment committee, and let's have the performance assessment committee provide some. Catherine, you're.
I'll talk to Mark.
Okay. All right. Vijay.
This document was created all massive, and we have it all the time, every year, more submissions, more and more guidance. I think it's time to go revisit that and use some of the learnings we have received in the last 5-7 years and see how that structure can be revised.
Yeah, so that's as much as I'd like to say, yeah, we learn from our learnings and we learn from the process, we might be limited by the indemnity, which I wasn't involved in, but my understanding is that there was a lot of agonizing for multiple years and multiple lawyers to get a document that everyone was, to get that document. And so if we're proposing to change the wording of that document, that might be a battle that we'd have to think carefully about.
Just like everything else. I hope that's not written in stone. Rules, laws, everything gets revised with time.
Yeah.
So this should be good.
Okay.
We can't take on the...
Okay, so maybe put some thought to what you think would be a suggested change, and let's hear it. And I think we need to move on now. But if there are suggested changes, things that you think aren't working with the system, then yeah, let's take a look at it.
Maybe make a pod issue.
Yeah, pod issue. All right. It's a response for everything these days. Yeah.
That document's going to be hard to change, but the other, which was considered fairly odd, that there were all those arguments going on, that when you get arm's length, and then the firm has to do either so that the AP and the project team are not
Well, I guess I'm curious what the proposed changes are. I'm not sure if the proposed changes are to make it less stringent or more stringent. I'm not sure.
Well, I think it's just be flagged, maybe pod issue, you get experience evaluating professionals.
Yeah, okay.
You understand what the issues are, then it's not working.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I'll be honest. I know I'm aware of some gray area things that we sort of struggle with, but I haven't had a problem, in my opinion. I haven't heard people really express concerns with staying on side with what's written. So I guess if there are serious concerns with staying on side, or that what's in writing is not appropriate, then let's hear those concerns.
Well, if we just change P6 and we're only allowed to low risk sites, and who cares?
All right on that.
All right. Okay, so time's flying. Okay, I'm just gonna show two more quick slides, just because I thought about it and I want to share it with you. So one question that other people, I understand, wrestle with is, if you want to be an arm's length reviewer, but you've been working for this firm for many years and you've touched many files, does having some involvement on a file many, many years ago preclude you from doing an arm's length review? If you were involved in an assessment that was done in 1993 prior to the CSR, does that mean that you can't act as an arm's length reviewer? So I think these are things that need to keep in mind, and I guess the underlying goal is, would that previous involvement have obstructed your objectivity of doing the arm's length review for what is being submitted now? So again, I'm not saying what we should or shouldn't do, but I guess I'm putting out some examples to think about and things to consider about whether what you're doing is appropriate or not. So if it was old work and there's basically all the data that the conclusions are based on are new work that you weren't involved with, then it should probably be okay. And then similarly, if you're doing an arm's length review of a risk assessment, but you had historical involvement in a stage 1 PSI many years ago, does that preclude your ability to do an arm's length review of the risk assessment? Probably not. But if it was a stage 2, or if it was DSI, or if you were involved in remediation, then it starts to get gray and sticky. So anyways, those are just a couple of quick thoughts. So that's it. That's my summary. You can take a look at it. And to move things along, I'll introduce Colin, who's going to talk about the resources that are available for making a submission.